Hello and a very warm welcome to Tata Literature Live 2021, the Mumbai International Literature Festival where you can enjoy literature unmasked, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects and powered by Godrej. This session is presented by Kotak. We've had some terrific sessions and performances today and some even more exciting discussions, workshops and events lined up over the next 3 days. So do log into our website tatalitlive.in for the schedule and keep logging in. On to our session now, Activity Report. Are you wondering why we are talking about exercise at a literature festival? Well, reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body, and helping us debunk myths and misconceptions about exercise today. And joining us from Copenhagen, we have a paleoanthropologist, professor of the Department of Human Evolutionary Biology at Harvard University. He studies how and why the human body is the way it is, with his research combining paleontology, anatomy, physiology, and experimental biomechanics in the lab and on the field. His latest book, published this year, is titled Exercised: Why Something We Never Evolved to Do is Healthy and Rewarding. Please welcome Dr. Daniel Lieberman, an avid marathoner, often barefoot, earning him the nickname the Barefoot Professor. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you.
Joining him today in conversation from Mumbai will be once an extremely overweight, borderline obese restaurant critic. He is now not only the most annoyingly trim and fit member of the Tata Literature Live Committee, but continues to eat his way through Mumbai. From being a dedicated couch potato, he transformed into one of those perverse enthusiasts who enjoy running long distances to stay healthy. Please welcome Antoine Lewis. At the end of the conversation, we will be taking questions from the audience. So please feel free to leave your questions in the chat box from the platform you're joining us on through their conversation. Now, to debunk myths about exercise, let's lunge, sprint, and dive into this conversation. Over to you, Antoine.
Meher, thanks so much for that very energetic introduction. Daniel, thank you for being part of LitLive and for joining us from Copenhagen. You've traveled a lot for this book, and I'm just going to read out all the things that you've done. You've carried water on your head in Kenya, tracked musk oxen and kudu with indigenous hunters in Greenland and Tanzania, joined an ancient Native American foot race under the stars in Mexico, raced on foot against horses in the mountains of Arizona, played barefoot cricket in rural India as well. Before we jump into all the research and the data, tell me what was the most fun part about writing this book?
Gosh, I mean, that's hard to answer, but I think that in some ways, one of my most enjoyable occasions was actually when I went to Sweden to participate in the mandatory sports hour at the Bjorn Borg Sports Company. Actually, that was
right.
Because that was something I was totally unexpected to do, and turned out to be a really interesting and kind of strange experience, despite the fact that it was just in Sweden. But yeah, no, I think maybe that sort of stands out because I've spent my years and years doing research in Africa and other sorts of places, so I'm kind of used to doing that. But this was totally different for me.
Okay. Coming to the title of your book, which in Darwinian terms seems a little contradictory. How is it possible that something that is healthy and rewarding is not something that we evolved to do? It would seem to be that evolution would kind of take you in the direction of something that is good for you. And when we do exercise, we are really good at it. So could you explain that for us, this paradox for us?
Yeah, well, that's a great question and that's one of the reasons why I titled the book what I did, because it's important to make a distinction between physical activity, which is moving, right, just doing anything, and most people, who are farmers or hunter-gatherers or all of us, do physical activity when we do house chores or go shopping or whatever. That's physical activity. But exercise is a very modern concept. Exercise is discretionary, voluntary physical activity we do for the sake of health and fitness. And until recently, nobody did that. And still, most people today don't exercise. It's a kind of an abnormal thing because we have all kinds of instincts to avoid unnecessary, unrewarding physical activity, and which is what exercise is. I mean, and to me, the the apotheosis of that is the treadmill. I mean, I don't know about you, but I hate treadmills. I mean, I put people on treadmills for a living, but I will do anything to avoid being on a treadmill. It's a noisy, expensive, unpleasant machine. You can fall off easily, and it makes you work really hard. You get nothing done, right? So to me, a treadmill is the apotheosis of just how bizarre, and strange, and weird, and modern, and exercise is.
So is your argument that exercise is something that has happened perhaps in the post-industrial phase, perhaps something that you could link to what we call the convenience economy, and it's not something that we did historically?
Right. I mean, what happened was that exercise really, the kind of modern concept of exercise began in many different cultures, India among them, as you get the rise of a sort of elite class, right? People who no longer had to do physical activity, no longer had to do labor, right? Didn't have to work in the field or whatever. And we realize in every culture that if you want your prince to be healthy, he better exercise, ride horses, wrestle, whatever it is, right? In different cultures, it's always different, but it's all the variations on the same thing. And then with the rise of middle classes in the Industrial Revolution, all of a sudden we commercialized it, we commodified it, we medicalized it. We made it. That's what we do with everything in our modern world, right? And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Right. So when you say you medicalize it, are you talking about things like you're taking 1,000 steps a day, 10,000 steps a day, and all? Is that what you mean when you say that?
Well, I mean, when we prescribe it, right? Like when we say, exercise is medicine. That's a very common phrase you hear, right? You take it like, I don't know, like a pill, right? And we prescribe 10,000 steps a day, or 30 minutes a day, or 150 minutes a week, or whatever. And of course, we know that most of the time when we prescribe exercise, people don't follow the prescription. Just as with pills, if you tell people to take pills, a large percentage of people who are prescribed medication don't take even a pill. So how do you expect them to then do something as hard as exercise? So there's nothing wrong with it, and I'm not opposed to the idea that there's a medical benefit to exercise, but I think the evidence is that medicalizing it has only taken us so far, right? It doesn't really, and the reason for that is that we're asking people to do something that's really instinctively difficult, right? And then we blame them. We make them feel bad. We tell them that they're lazy. Right. Somehow they should feel ashamed of themselves, which of course just makes things worse.
Right. I mean, that's one of the things that really struck me about your book, that you've shown a lot of compassion actually towards people who find it difficult to exercise or don't want to exercise. And you say that, well, this is not something natural, and you need to approach the anti-exerciser, so to speak, with some completely differently.
That's right. I think that we live in a very judgmental world about so many aspects of people's bodies. Right? We're very judgmental about obesity. We're very judgmental about physical activity. We're judgmental about sleep. We're judgmental about sitting. We're very just really horribly judgmental in many ways. And I think as I've traveled around and lived in different cultures and worked with farmers in Africa and in Mexico and places like that, I've come to realize that this kind of non-compassionate, very critical, sort of blaming and shaming culture is really antithetical to human nature, right? In every culture in the world, people try to take it easy when they can. If you put, lifts or escalators in the Amazon jungle or in the Kalahari or wherever, people would take them there too. It's normal. And then we tell them that something's wrong with them, that there's somehow deficient, and I think that just for many people that just causes a reaction, right? It causes just a negative reaction. They feel bad about themselves, and it doesn't help them. So I think we should be compassionate towards each other.
You brought up sitting and sleeping, and that's one part of the book that I found really fascinating. What everyone talks about sitting being the new smoking, and that you need to have your 8 hours of rest. But you say that is not really necessary, and we need to kind of rethink this whole thing about both these issues. And I like the idea of active sitting. I think that's what you talk about. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, so I decided to start the book on physical inactivity because if you want to understand physical activity and exercise, you first have to understand its absence. And listening to some sort of so-called experts, some you get the sense that our ancestors were constantly active and they were super strong and they were running around and they were getting their perfect 8 hours of sleep and and that's just completely made up. It's nonsense. If you go to most parts of the world where people are working very hard, when they can, they sit down. They may not sit in comfy chairs with backrest. They may sit on the ground or something like that. But it's completely normal to sit. And our animals sit, dogs sit, cows sit. I mean, monkeys sit. Everybody sits, right? There's nothing abnormal about it. But then we come up with these phrases like "sitting is the new smoking." And I think the people who say that, they're well-meaning, right? They want to try to encourage people to be physically active, but what they've effectively done is demonizing something completely natural. And why can't I think we can be more honest with people? I think people are more intelligent than we credit, right? They can understand that sitting is normal and natural, but if you sit all day long and you never get up and move, well, of course that's going to cause a problem, right? And it turns out also that as you just mentioned, there are more healthy ways of sitting. It turns out that if you get up every once in a while, right, about every 10, 15 minutes or so, that sort of kind of wakes up your muscles a little bit, turns on sort of your cells a little bit, and turns out to have a lot of benefits. So you can sit the same amount, two people can sit the same amount of time, but the person who gets up and makes a cup of tea and goes to the bathroom or, goes and pets their dog or, whatever, just gets up every once in a while, is a healthier person than the person who sits without ever getting up for long periods of time.
Okay. Okay. So the key here is activity. And is there a number really in terms of how much? I know again we're going back to that, but how active should you be during the day, or how much do you require to be healthy, or a week?
Right. So that question is, I think, a perfect example of the medicalization of exercise, right? The idea that there's a prescription, right? There's a certain amount that we should do. And as an evolutionary biologist, I don't believe there's an answer to that, right? There is no perfect amount. The evidence is that, first of all, the evidence is that exercise is not a magic bullet, right? It doesn't necessarily prevent you from getting sick. People who exercise get sick too. What it does is it reduces your vulnerability to getting sick. And it has all kinds of other benefits, but it's not a magic bullet. Secondly, the evidence is that if you're very inactive, any amount is better than none. And so if you never get any exercise, you're not getting much physical activity, just a little bit, 10 minutes a day, climbing the stairs in your building or something is better than nothing at all. But that more is better. And there's a certain point after, maybe 300, 400 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a week, it kind of levels off. And there's there's not that much benefit. So you don't need to run a marathon, or swim the English Channel or, I don't know, climb Mount Everest or whatever to get the benefits of physical activity. Just moderate levels can be enormously valuable in terms of reducing your chances of getting disease, increasing vitality. But it's not a talisman that will prevent, you from getting sick. It makes you much less vulnerable, much less susceptible to a wide range of diseases, among them, by the way, COVID.
Right, right. And I was just going to come to that. One of the big things, we were all trapped in our homes for the last 1 year, 1.5 years, and the need to be active was something that was suppressed, especially with people who were ill, who had comorbidities, and that's a word that we all got familiar with, I think, in the last 2 years. They would have benefited the most from activity, but that was something denied to them. So do you have any idea of how that has affected people, or has there been any research on this, on the pandemic?
Yes, there has. In fact, I was part of a group that did a big international study on how the pandemic and the lockdown affected physical activity. And the answer is probably not too surprising, but what we see is a kind of exaggeration of extremes in most countries. So people who have the means, people who are wealthy, who are more educated, who have more money, who live in in environments where they can exercise more easily because they live in wealthy neighborhoods, a lot of those people responded to the pandemic by actually increasing their exercise. They suddenly realized, oh my gosh, I better do something. And they also had a little bit more time, and they weren't commuting and whatever. Whereas people who were a lower socioeconomic status, a lot of those folks ended up getting less physical activity because of all the stress in their lives and the fact that they didn't live in environments where they could exercise. So what we've seen is actually a kind of an increased dichotomization with more physical activity among the wealthy and less physical activity among those who are more vulnerable. And to me, it's one of the tragedies of this pandemic because it's just highlighted the differences between those who have and those who don't have. The have-nots, as we say in English. It's very it's one of those things that that we as a society need to work on because physical activity ought to be something that everybody can enjoy. But
Right. You've also pointed out that there's a point beyond which physical activity doesn't give you any benefit. And one of the things that we see, definitely the media does play it up, is about athletes who drop dead on the field, of personal trainers, dropping dead mid-exercise, or even just healthy people out in the middle of the lunch. So is there such a thing as too much exercise as well?
Well, that's a very controversial topic. To be honest, a lot of people assume that there is, but if you look at the data, there's actually not much evidence that you can exercise too much. Even the myth of Pheidippides, who ran the first marathon, and at the end he dies after he tells the Athenians that they won the battle, right? That wasn't actually reported by Herodotus. It was actually made up hundreds and hundreds of years later to make it more romantic. So yes, every once in a while somebody dies during a marathon, but actually the people who are watching the marathon from the side are more likely to die. And in fact, every time there's a big marathon in a big city, there are actually the fatality rate in the city goes down because of all the traffic gets stopped by the runners. And the folks who do get heart trouble during a marathon, those are people who would have that anyway. What happened is that the marathon just kind of accentuated it a little bit, but they would have probably dropped dead from a congenital heart problem, a few weeks later anyway. It's just the marathon kind of precipitated it a little bit. So the idea that there is that the activity itself is causing damage is just completely irrefuted by the data. That said, everything has trade-offs, and certainly and exercise is no different. You can injure yourself when exercising. People who exercise a lot might be a little bit more susceptible to atrial fibrillation, which is a heart trouble that some people get. But for the most part, those individuals are very few and far between. Those are people at the very, very extreme end of the graph, right? We have very small numbers of people who over-exercise. We should really focus on the vast majority of human beings who are struggling to get enough physical activity. And them, scare stories about exercising too much just confuse them and make them, as I titled the book, exercised, because people get exercised, confused, anxious, and sort of about exercise because of the way we treat the topic.
Right. So a lot of people, and this includes me, have come to exercise not because of exercise, because of its benefits, but because as a strategy to lose weight. And that's where we started from, and then we just fall in love with it, and now we kind of get addicted to it. And we can suffer from things like the runner's high. But there were points in which we had conflicting information about weight loss and exercise. There was a point where everyone said, yes, you need to exercise. Then it was no, it was about diet. And now in your book, you talk about the benefit of exercise. So where are we exactly in this in terms of exercise and its effect on weight?
Yeah, it's still a controversy. I'll be very honest, but I think stepping back from my own particular biases, I would say that the evidence suggests that if you want to lose weight, there's no question that dieting is more effective than exercise, right? If I go for a 5-mile run this morning, I'll burn off about 500 calories, but if I don't eat a hamburger, I'll not gain those 500 calories, right? It's much easier to go into what we call negative energy balance, to reduce your caloric, balance by dieting than exercise. So that's one thing. But it also is true that and another issue is that exercise can cause what's called compensation. So if you exercise, you also get hungry afterwards. So you tend to make up for some of what you spent. And there's some debates now about how it affects your metabolic rate. So the answer. So if you really want to lose weight fast, dieting is your strategy. But exercise is very important for. It has some added benefits. So you can lose weight exercising. You just won't lose it very fast. You'll lose it much more slowly, much more gradually, and over a period of time, which actually can be a very good strategy. And in addition, what the evidence shows is that exercise is really important for preventing weight gain or what's called weight regain. So what happens with a lot of diets is that people lose weight, then they finish their diet, and then it comes roaring back, right? And exercise is really important for helping prevent weight regain. So it's an effective strategy for. So I think it shouldn't be an either or. Anybody who's on a diet should also include exercise. Plus, exercise has so many other wonderful benefits. Let's enjoy all of those other benefits.
Absolutely. But just sticking to one more, the question of diet again. Again, there is another set of philosophy, and we see that with Ayurveda in India, for instance, which talks mostly about health being maintained rather through a diet more than exercise or even through yoga. But yoga is seen as something supplemental. So where do you stand on that? Is diet something that will guarantee health more than exercise?
Yeah, I find that interesting that I mean, why is it diet versus exercise? Why not both? I mean, it's not like they're two alternative strategies. They're complementary, I mean, there's no question that health, is a function of your environment, right? And stress is an important part of health. Sleep is an important part of health. Diet is an important part of health, and physical activity is an important part of health, and they're complementary. So I think that these kinds of alternatives are kind of a false logic, and I think we should avoid them, right? They're all important.
Okay, fair enough. One of my problems as a food writer, and when I'm looking at data on diet and nutrition, and looking at a lot of the research that comes in, and it's very Western oriented, and I find that that's true with a lot of the research on exercise as well. How applicable is it to the Indian context, for instance? I mean, given, as you point out yourself, that the subjects are largely weird, in your own words.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is a major issue that I try to tackle in the book because, 90% of the data that we have about health in general, about every aspect of health, including psychological health, comes from people in North America and Europe, and what we call weird countries: Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Weird, right? And so weird people are 10% of the world, and yet they're 90% of the biomedical data that we have. And so the perspective that I take in the book is a very much non-weird perspective. That we look at how people are physically active on every continent in the world. We look at, and when you do that, you realize that exercise itself is a very kind of bizarre, weird, kind of westernized, industrialized, medicalized kind of behavior. But you also learn that that the basic, underneath all of that, we're all basically the same. Your cells and my cells and those of somebody in Greenland or Australia or South Africa, we all function deep down physiologically and anatomically in the same way. And so the stresses that we put on our body and the responses that we put on our body and that come from physical activity are fundamentally exactly the same no matter where you look, right? With all the wonderful variation that we have within every population. So the differences are more within populations than between populations in terms of how it functions at a basic level.
Okay. I was also thinking about in the case of India, where we have a greater incidence of heart disease and diabetes compared to the rest of the world, and whether that makes any difference within how much you need to exercise or what kind of exercises you need to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's true that there are some populations that seem to be more vulnerable to certain diseases, and part of that is because of the combination of traditional foods. Some maybe there are some genetic susceptibilities. I mean, it's all very complicated. But in no population on the planet does the evidence suggest that a healthy diet and physical activity and reducing stress have anything other than benefits. So in India, for example, as the middle class is expanding and more people have access to high energy foods and there's less physical activity, diabetes rates, for example, in India are skyrocketing, right? And heart disease, as you know, is skyrocketing. And so there's no question that physical activity is one of the most important ways to address metabolic health and cardiovascular health. So I very much hope that jogging and other forms of physical activity take more root in India or Africa, places where I work, because these, it's expensive to treat these diseases and it causes suffering and illness, and the best thing to do is prevent them rather than treat them, right? So if we got more people moving and we got people eating, especially when they're inactive and eating high carbohydrate diets with lots of sugar, that's a really very bad combination.
Right. Well, there's one part of your book that actually quite upset me, because you talk about balancing aerobic exercise and strength training, and I find that the world is kind of broken up into people who like strength training and people like me who like aerobic. And so I was upset when you said, you need to do both. So why do I need to do both?
Well, because as you age, Antoine, you're going to get more and more frail, right? Your muscles, there are different kinds of physical activities. Some of them involve, aerobic activity, cardio, but you also need to keep your muscles strong. And as you get older, you're going to get it harder to get out of a chair. You're going to start walking more slowly, and strength training is really important to prevent that loss of muscle mass. That's called sarcopenia. And when that happens, you get a vicious circle. Because as you become more frail, basic tasks become more difficult. Your bones also will get less strong. So as we get older, strength training actually becomes more and more important. So mixing it up. I mean, I'm the same as you. I like cardio, right? I'm a runner, and I don't really enjoy doing weights. But I'm in my late 50s, and I'm trying hard to do it several times a week. And even though it's not my favorite thing to do, I can feel that it's giving me some benefits. So I feel the same as you.
Well, good to know we're on the same page. But that brings us to an interesting part. I mean, we always talk about, as you grow older, of slowing down, of kind of taking things easy. But you're saying we need to keep up at it so that we stay healthier longer. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe this is the most important thing in the book, actually, which is that, humans are unusual. We evolved to live long after we stop reproducing. No other animal does that. Well, maybe killer whales, orcas do. But other than that, pretty much every other animal in the world dies pretty much when it stops reproducing. But we evolved to be grandparents. And grandparents, until recently, and in many cultures still today, grandparents' function is to work, right? You help your children and your grandchildren. You work in the fields, or you hunt and you gather. And when you do that, you turn on all kinds of repair and maintenance mechanisms that keep you from senescing, keep you healthy. And so I would argue that I call this the active grandparent hypothesis, that humans actually evolved to be physically active grandparents. And that activity, as we age, is part of the way in which we evolved to have a long health span. Because until modern medicine, health span, the years that you lived as a sort of healthy without chronic disease, was also your lifespan, because you can go to the hospital or a doctor and get treated. And so health span is dependent on, to some extent, physical activity. And so as we age and get older, physical activity is, we evolved to be physically active partly in order to keep us healthy as we aged. It's actually part of the human condition. So this idea of retiring and take it easy when we get older is again a very modern, kind of westernized, industrialized perspective that does not serve us well. And what it does is it sends us to the hospital, and causes enormous amount of misery and grief, not to mention economic cost.
Right. And I find that that's true even in the area of mental health. I know that's not something that really is going to be answered in the book, but is something that the whole notion of retiring is something that's very detrimental in many ways to the human body, both
I
physically
agree.
and mentally.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we need to go into questions right now. And do we have any questions coming up or? Okay, so we have a question from Rita who says there have been a number of young people passing away in the recent past due to cardiac arrest. Do you think it's because of the stress levels or lack of physical activity, or is it a result of excess physical activity? Or do you think it has something to do with COVID?
So there are congenital heart abnormalities. It's common in every population in the world, right? Because of the complex way in which the heart folds and develops, humans as a species are vulnerable to cardiac abnormalities, and unfortunately, those individuals are vulnerable to cardiac arrest and often it happens when they exercise. The exercise itself doesn't cause it. The exercise precipitates it, and it's just one of those very distressing things. But it's not on the rise. If any, and so if you are concerned about your heart, it's a good idea to go see a cardiologist, a doctor, get a stress test, and they can assess your heart and find out if that's an issue. So, for example, at Harvard, all the athletes in the Harvard teams get a checkup, just to kind of check their hearts out to make sure that they're not vulnerable. But it's not the exercise that causes it.
We have another interesting question from Anuradha Chatterjee, who says that when we were young, we'd be out playing all the time, but my kids are stuck to their computers and mobiles. What can I do to get them to be more active? And will their inactivity be harmful to them when they grow up? I think that's a really important question.
Yes, it's an extremely important question. So the sad news is that, yes, inactivity when you're young does have long-lasting effects. It's important. It's really important for children to exercise. In fact, pretty much every major health organization agrees that kids need about an hour of moderate to vigorous physical activity every day to develop normally. And if they don't, they're not going to develop healthy skeletons. They're not going to help develop healthy metabolisms. So it's really important. But to do it is really hard because, as you say, kids are glued to their screens, very small and big. And I think that the solution, and I argue that we should treat exercise the way we treat education, right? How do we make, education is another kind of weird modern thing that we do, right? Nobody knew how to read until recently. Nobody learned how to do algebra or calculus or whatever. And so so we make them go to school, right? How do we make education work in the modern world? Well, we make it two things. We make it necessary, but we also make it rewarding. We make it fun. School is fun for the most part. I mean, usually, right? You have clubs, you meet friends, you do all kinds of wonderful things in school, and I think we should do the same thing for exercise, right? We need to make it both necessary, and I think for most people, the way you make it rewarding is make it social, right? Exercising on your own is fun, but playing with other people is fun. So it doesn't have to be sports where it's competitive. There are so many ways to play with people outside, and so I think we need to find ways to help our kids be more physically active. Play dates that are outside, where you're running around. Meet on a field and play frisbee or soccer or what? Cricket, right? I've played cricket in India. I know that's a big passion. Right? I mean, whatever. It doesn't matter. Dancing, whatever people enjoy doing. I think we need to figure out how to do that. And again, making it social is the most important thing.
Right. But this is not a problem only for young children. I mean, you talk about college-going students and the older children as well, where educational institutions don't give any emphasis on exercise and activity as much as they do for academic results.
That's right. Yeah. So we're actually working at this at Harvard. So like most educational institutions, we dropped our physical activity requirement in the 1970s and late 60s, early 70s before anybody knew what was coming, and now it's very hard to kind of reintroduce it, right? You're not allowed to do that anymore, right? You're not, for some reason, it's completely okay to coerce students to read your book and take exams and, you know, make them write papers and all that sort of stuff, but somehow making them, you know, run around a field or, you know, get their heart rate up playing a game of something or whatever is somehow considered coercive and inappropriate. I think that's kind of funny, but so we're trying to figure out ways to kind of reintroduce physical activity as part of the kind of normal part of college life, and that's not easy. But again, I think the way to do that is to make it social, right? To help get people with their friends. I mean, I don't know about you, Antoine, but you're also a runner. But one of the ways I run is that I have friends I run with, and I you know, the night before I agree to meet them at some time, and often at 6 in the morning I don't want to meet my friend Aaron, you know. It's like, it's 6, it's dark, it's cold, I'd rather be in bed with my wife, you know, but he's going to be waiting for me on the corner and I better get out there and run. So I do. And I'm always glad that I did afterwards. So the social commitment, I think, is extremely effective.
Oh, okay. So we have a question from Anita Lobo, which says, are some exercises better than others? Is running better than walking? Is swimming better than running? When it comes to strength training, is it better to exercise complex muscle groups or specific muscles?
Well, again, that's this sort of idea that there's a kind of a right way to exercise, this kind of prescription kind of based sort of medicalization. I mean, everybody's different, right? It depends on whether you're young or old, what your goals are, whether you're worried about cancer or you're worried about heart disease or whether you're worried about your weight. There is no single prescription, right? And I think the most important thing is to do what you enjoy, but, you know, also mix it up. And I think everybody benefits from some degree of strength training, but, you know, a bedrock of every physical activity program should be cardio. But beyond that, you know, there's no one rule. I mean, it's good to mix it up. It's good to get a little intensity in occasionally, but if you only did high intensity training, that's not the best thing either. There's, you know, again, the most important thing is to have fun and stay healthy and have some variety, and but everybody's goals are totally different, and I couldn't answer that question beyond a kind of that sort of vague answer.
Okay. We have another question which is along the same lines from Ravi Wazir, but his question is, in terms of age, is there a way to say that, you know, things are better, or a certain mix of exercises is better for different age groups?
I mean, again, I hope that if people get a chance to read the book, they'll realize that one of the reasons I wrote the book is to try to get us away from this kind of medicalized, prescriptive kind of approach, right? There is no perfect prescription, and everybody's different, and your background is different from my background, and your fitness level or your previous injury history or your health concerns are different, and so there's no simple answer to that, other than very vague general, you know, answer, which is that some is better than none, is more is better than a little bit, but eventually how much you do tails off, and it's good to mix things up, you know, and you know, as you get older, don't forget to do some strength training, and beyond that, have fun, you know, and don't get exercised about exercise, because I think that's what we do. We're always worried about what's the right, you know, it's like taking antibiotics, you know, how many milligrams should I be taking? You know, it doesn't work that way. It's not a medicine. It's the reverse of that. It's that the absence of physical activity makes you more vulnerable to disease, right? Makes you more likely to get sick. So it's not like taking it's what you're restoring to your life what we evolved to do.
You know, when you talk about fun, one of the things that I thought about and I wondered where it fitted was dancing. I mean, I can't really see why so many cultures have dancing as being so important, and yet it doesn't perform any real function. So was that a way that we developed to exercise?
Well, I think it's a way. Well, again, I wouldn't say that dancing was in most cultures a form of exercise. We do sometimes treat it that way, but it's an important form of physical activity in every culture on the planet, right? And dancing is rewarding, right? It teaches, it helps you find a mate sometimes, or stay connected to people. Or in some cultures, it's part of rituals for healing. For example, there are trance dances and healing dances in many cultures. Brings on rain, but it's also a way of helping people train and stay fit and learn physical skills. I don't think it's enjoyable, right? So I think dancing is undervalued as a form of physical activity today in many cultures, and wouldn't it be lovely if we had, a few years ago, actually just after Donald Trump got elected, I was so upset. I just had to get out of the U.S., so I just got on my daughter and I went to Mexico. We went to the Yucatan Peninsula. We went to this little town, this tiny little town, and in the middle of the town square, everybody was dancing, and we joined them, and it was just charming and delightful. We danced for a little while, and it just made me realize how universal and pleasant and pleasurable and enjoyable it was. And we met people, and we had if we all danced more, the world would be a much better place, for sure.
I agree with you on that one. And I wish there was somewhere that we could go to and dance like somewhere outside the country, but that's a different debate altogether. We have one last question, which says, and this is from Pratap, traditional practices like yoga recommend a more restrained and gentle form of exercise versus Western extreme push the limits, no pain, no gain. Do you find there is a difference in the reward to the human body? Sorry, that was from Anjali Pratap.
Well, I think, again, every form of physical activity is good. And yes, it's good to do gentle, stress relieving, stretching, yoga. All of these things are good, but it's also good to push your body a little bit. Because when you push your body, when you stress your body, you actually activate repair and maintenance mechanisms. And so, again, yoga is a modern, from an evolutionary perspective, it's also a recent tradition, right? Our ancestors couldn't get by just doing yoga, right? They had to go out and farm the fields. They had to go hunt. They had to run. They had to do all kinds of things. That's what our bodies evolved to do. And so it's a wonderful part of your life. But is it the optimal thing to do and not to avoid other things? No, that's not. There's no evidence to support that.
Okay. Well, Daniel, it was such a pleasure chatting with you. I absolutely love the book, and I think anyone who is interested in exercise, anyone who, like me, actually was a couch potato and who didn't really want to exercise and who really didn't see any benefit from exercise, should absolutely read the book. I mean, it's a true eye-opener. And I think one of the things that it really did for me is when I looked at people, and I saw people on the street, even whatever their shape, their size, running, and putting whatever minimal effort they were putting, I kind of recognized the effort that they were doing and said, okay, I mean, this person's made a start, and that is wonderful. And I think that is the approach we should all take to everybody else, that however little they're putting in, they've made a start, and that's worth recognizing. So thank you, Daniel, and Meher, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lieberman and Antoine, for that super informative and energetic conversation. And a huge thanks to you, our ever-loyal audience, for joining us today, and all our partners that have made this festival possible. Thanks to our title sponsor Tata and co-sponsors Tata Steel and Tata Projects, powered by Godrej. This session is presented by Kotak. You can buy the books we spoke about in this session from our knowledge partner, landmarkxcite.com, our virtual bookstore. Do remember to log into our exciting sessions lined up tomorrow through the day, where the Little Festival has sessions in the morning hosted by Shobha Tharoor, Andy Griffiths, Matt Haig and Shabnam Minwala, amongst others. We also have the Lifetime Achievement Award for Tata Literature Live 2021 given to Mrs. Anita Desai at 1915 IST. Do check out our website, tatalitlive.in, for the rest of the schedule over the next few days. Our festival social media handle is @TataLitLive across all networks. That concludes our session for today. Thank you so much for being at Tata Literature Live 2021, where you can enjoy Literature Unmasked. Stay safe and happy reading.